At that point, what you do is you just get a hireling and you say, listen, I've got all these spells I need to cast. Here's your 5 gold for the month. Make sure I'm stocked up on all my spell components.
Alex, over the holiday season, which was
holiday season?
The one from a few months ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Over that holiday season, you might have found yourself playing a board game or two with friends or family. Probably not you.
I did not.
Okay.
But we'll pretend for the pretense here.
Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that yes, you did. I did, though, and I went back to play Catan with some of my family. And I got to a point in Catan, I don't know if you've ever played the game before.
A couple times, but not really my jam.
Okay. For those of you who are not aware, Catan is basically a resource management game where you have to build roads and towns and cities, and you can trade different resources to other players, and you have to collect them based on a grid that gives you resources when you roll the dice. Well, there is a mechanic in that game that we actually just completely eliminated because it was becoming very frustrating to people who don't play a lot of these games. And that was the robber. And so the robber is a little gray nugget piece that they have in the middle of the board. And the idea is that when you roll a 7 on your 2d6s, the robber gets to move to a square on the board, whatever square you want to move it to, and whoever owns property at that square, you can steal a resource from them, but also that square does not produce any resources while the robber is on it, until you roll another 7 and you move it to another space.
So it's really just a strategy thing. You get the robber and you use it to shut down an opponent and steal a resource.
Exactly. It is basically a negative resource gathering tool, which I suppose functionally helps to keep people from getting too many resources too quickly, but for people who are maybe not all that versed on tabletop game, mostly just becomes a complete annoyance that keeps the game from progressing forward. And so what we eventually did after a little bit was just take Mr. Robber off the board entirely and just re-roll on 7s until you got a different number. Because I don't know if you're aware, but if you have 2d6s, 7 is basically the most common number you're going to come across. It is the number in the middle of, your 2 to 12. So you roll it a lot. And so you're constantly just moving the thing around and taking people's resources and shutting down whole production lines on the board. And it makes it a lot faster once you eliminate it. And that's got me thinking about game rules that you don't use for similar situations to that. I feel like this probably happens a lot with people when they play classic board games. Not necessarily the newer classic, Euro games, but your Monopolies or your...
Yeah, it's the house ruling thing. It's like Monopoly when you do free parking gets you all the money in the center of the board or something from people paying taxes.
A lot of those rules I've started to realize are mostly there to try and streamline the process to get more stuff, not for the elimination of it. The other one that it got me thinking about was Carcassone, and I really like Carcassone, but when I bought it, it had this wonky little piece, because in Carcassone you have your little meeples, and then there was a little special meeple that had a little pontiff hat on, and that was the abbot. And the idea about the abbot was it was a specialty piece, and you could use that when you get churches. Unlike the other meeples, you could take it off the board at any time and just collect points based on how many tiles were around your abbot, around your church, which normally you can't do. A lot of times you would just put your regular meeple on there, and you couldn't take it off until it was completely surrounded, and then you'd get your 9 points, and you could take your piece off the board. So it is actually functional, but the problem is that trying to explain to everybody that there's this one specific piece that does something very specific and can only be used in one specific way usually just overly complicates the whole thing.
Yeah.
And we didn't really utilize it at all and just stuck to the regular meeples with the regular rules. This is just mostly for streamlining of the rule set so that you don't have any special exceptions, even though it technically gave you a whole other piece that was more functional. Taking it out actually simplified the whole thing, especially for people that are, again, not very versed in this. I'm dealing with people that are much older than me, and pretty much after, like, Parcheesi, got confused. So,
Yeah.
and I ain't gonna be able to play role-playing games with them, folks. The first time they see a stat sheet, they are going to lose their mind. So, I pretty much have to just go with, like, I could teach you a newer game that's a board game, like a Ticket to Ride, but I can't make it overly complicated, like, well, if we don't have this many players, then you can't run 2 rails on the same slot. No, you just can. There's 2 spots, sure, you can run a line, I can run a line, who the hell cares? It's not really that important. I know there's only 3 of us, but that's fine. You can build a road, I can build a road, let's go for it.
I feel like getting people into games, it doesn't matter their age, really. It's best to start with something more simple, to at least be like, here, familiarize yourself with kind of the concept, and kind of how the games play, or how it shakes out, and, like, simplifying rules definitely helps for that. Doesn't matter the age bracket, kids get frustrated too.
Oh,
for
yeah.
instance. It's like, if this rule is in there, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, or it's just kind of complex, it's like, maybe we'll leave that out for now. Maybe we'll add that in later once you've learned the basics. You know, role-playing games too, like, you were there when I was trying to teach my son how to play, and teaching Ray how to play. And streamlining some of that stuff is good too, because, as we talked before the show, encumbrance. Now, I know there are definitely diehard groups that will play a role-playing game, and make sure you keep track of every single piece of ammo and every single scrap of food and every weight of every item you've got.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like for the most part, players... I'm gonna guess, because I don't have a poll here of how many % of players do this, but I would say as a whole, most people just kind of go, yeah, keep it, like, within reason. I will let you carry things, but, like, if you've got a 300-pound gold bell on you, you're probably not carrying much else.
Right. We don't have to, like, nickel and dime your, 5 pounds here, 10 pounds here. It's not really all that important.
Kind of like, it'll be, well, how many things are you carrying? Are they all small things? Like, I've got 6 suits of leather armor in my bag. It's like, maybe not.
One thing that I have found for D&D that I don't think I have ever used, and pretty much gets hand-waved away even with experienced players, is magical components, because no one really wants to figure out if they have a bit of carrot and a piece of cotton in order to do a spell. You'll notice in Baldur's Gate 3, like, that never comes up.
Like, yeah, well, it's just... The biggest thing there is, unless it's a big component, like you need a diamond worth 1,000
gold. Yeah, those...
It's like, yeah, make sure you've got that. We're not going to hand-wave this one thing you need for a true resurrection, buddy.
Yeah, those seem very significant, but it's the little stuff that they just insist on that just makes it really feel bogged down.
At that point, what you do is you just get a hireling, and you say, listen, I've got all these spells I need to cast. Here's your 5 gold for the month. Make sure I'm stocked up on all my spell components.
Yeah, just do me a favor and keep scavenging for all of these things so I can use them. The thing, though, that I do look at, and I don't even know how many people will do this, is if it has verbal or physical components where you have to do hand gestures or you have to do verbal things. If you're in an area where you can't talk, then you can't actually cast the spell that takes a verbal component. Some people might not even think about it, but, you know.
And then somatic, for instance, it's like, well, do you have a free hand?
Yeah.
And for certain things, it's like, if you're carrying a cleric that would be holding like a shield and a mace, for instance, it's like, you can kind of do the somatic components with your hand on your mace. Doubly so if your item counts as your like holy symbol.
Also, if you're a warcaster or something, you know, that makes sense. But
it's little things like that that you kind of wave away. It's like, all right, well, are you gonna drop your mace? Are you gonna put it away and do your hand gestures?
Sure.
You don't really think, like, you've still got a free hand if you've got a shield buckled to your arm too. So, are your hands bound, for instance? Because you're probably not going to be able to do the things easily.
It's good to be able to sit around and play a game. But at the same time, I have realized that a lot of times games will add in components that will probably make sense in terms of trying to balance out gameplay, but don't necessarily work so well when you have new players that are going to get very lost and confused, or are going to get turned off by the game because, oh no, that robber just kept me from not getting anything on the board. So now why am I playing? I never got to the point where I could like build my towns and my cities and see how the mechanics work because the robber kept me from getting my wheat. So now I don't have my wheat and I can't build my town. So I thought that was one of those things that got me thinking about like mechanics in games, especially board games and card games, where those just end up being an annoyance entirely.
They end up being a barrier to entry that is not intended, I think.
Yeah. Oh.
It's like, obviously, when I play Warhammer, the barrier to entry is the fact you have to spend $700 on models.
Yeah, there's definitely a very financial barrier to entry on that. I think the barrier to entry for me was the technicality of Warhammer, where I had to really think about, like, trajectory lines and, like, all of that on the map itself, where I was like, this feels a little much. I hate to tell you this is probably why I didn't play Chainmail back in the day either, or anybody did. But
and let me tell you, they have not simplified the rules for those games at all.
No, and they have no interest of doing so. You figure it out, or too bad. I was going to say, the other thing in Carcassonne that I realized we eliminated entirely, there was also another expansion that like came out of the box for the version I had, which was the River expansion. And the River expansion is really cool. I think it's really cool. The idea is that you have a set of tiles that are the river, and those are the ones you put down first. And you basically create this river through the landscape, and then after you're done putting all of those in, then you build out the rest of the tiles around it. And I liked that, but we don't usually play with it because it's then another set of tiles that you have to like keep separated, and it keeps you from starting to like really put a lot of your roads and things in right up at the front. So we don't usually play with it. I like it. If it were just me playing it, I like having like the river that you get to use because it creates almost a spine for the rest of the board that you can build out. But they didn't like it because I think it felt a little too restrictive because you got to start with this one specific line of creating this out. And it keeps you from being able to develop out more. So there are some things like that I understand why some people don't want to play with them, whether it's out of the gate or it's rules in the expansions. But me personally, sometimes I think it's fun. I got Dad completely lost on Flux, which is okay because I also got lost when I played Flux. I had forgotten that it's a little more complex as to what I'm doing.
Yeah, a little bit.
In Flux. But hey, you know what? Love Letter, though, he figured out Love Letter real easy. That's not a
good.
complicated one.
Oh, good.
It's only like 14 cards in the whole deck, so it's pretty easy to figure out.
That's not bad then.
No. Love Letter's fun. And Suro. We've played Suro. It's very easy to understand those.
Yes.
Put a tile down, move your piece. Simple. Don't have to make that any less complicated.
Right.
If you have any game mechanics that you are not particularly in love with, let us know in the comments down below.